Bona tarda. Good afternoon. Fem la següent sessió del cicle Europa Europa amb el Kempe. Thank you very much for coming. We are very interested in what you are going to show us about your thought and your work. I avui comptarem amb el comissari d'Europa Europa, com ja sabeu, és el Moisés Puente. Tenim el Claudio Aguiló, que ens farà la introducció, i l'André Kempe, que és el nostre conferenciant. Paso la palabra al comisario. Sí.
Bueno, ya me has dejado sin tengo nada que decir. Bueno, que siempre ya sabes que soy breve. Bueno, bienvenidos a la ya séptima, ya quedan solo esta y otras dos. Esta vez hemos traído al equipo holandés, aunque son alemanes, Kempe Thill, y presenta por afinidades, yo creo que por afinidades, Claudio Aguiló de Data E. Y no mucho más. Venga.
Hola. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I'm a little nervous and uncomfortable. I usually don't talk about other architecture or the architect's architecture in public, and I don't do it in English. So I'm going to try to make a very short presentation. I'm going to use some of the text from your website to describe you, and also that way I don't have to talk that much in English. It's a very special office. They are from the east of Germany. The office is founded by André Kempe. And André Kempe, for example, he's been related to the University of Delft, and he's been teaching around the world. No, you said that also you've been teaching in other universities besides Lausanne, Düsseldorf, and Berlin. The same for Oliver Thill. He's a little bit younger, 2 years younger, and they both studied in Dresden, and so they are from the east of Germany, but they have the office in Rotterdam. He also taught in some of the same universities as you, besides some others, like, for example, I don't know, Berlage Institute, no? For example. The office, well, I really like this image and the way you plan the office and showing basically the archive in the shelves. I like it a lot. I have the same thing in my office. They founded the office in 2000 when they won a competition when they were working in Rotterdam. They applied to European competition on a site as well in Rotterdam. They won it, and that was the moment when they decided to open their own office, and they started to work on small-scale projects until they got big commissions, basically through public competitions. Yeah. So while they were doing that, they were 30 and 32 years old. Yeah. This is the thing, and it was in Rotterdam, and basically this is kind of their condition that they are not from Holland, but they practice in Holland, but they open the office a little bit, their production to the center of Europe, even though recently they've been working also abroad, like internationally, yeah, in Japan, no, you were saying, and some other projects. They have a few, these are the ones that I saw in the website, they have a few books published, and then they have a very interesting short text about a design statement that I really like it. They present a contradictory phenomenon where they basically announce a tension, a confrontation between two conditions, between neutral architecture or a neutral demand, and at the same time a specific attention or a specific architecture that also the new capitalism asks in terms of an answer to a specific question. No? And they say that the office try to combine these two conditions. In my point of view, the architecture can be described by different adjectives. For me, it could be raw, could be industrialized, could be standard, could be repetitive, and I think this could be seen in this beautiful and very interesting and very hard project, social housing project, that probably today you're going to explain. Can be also open, plural, social, available. As you can see in some images about how people use and have they kind of appropriate the spaces of this project. And at the same time, the architecture can be also bioclimatic, I think innovative and adaptable, how you can also can understand in this kind of winter gardens, you call it, yeah, of the in a lot of the projects, like in this image. And the architecture for me can be also craft, very technical, amazing details that they show it without any kind of problem, experimental and customized. Like, for example, in this beautiful project where there is this big contrast between what is very strict, very rigid, very defined, like the glass or the aluminum, and the soft with no shape of the insulation projected in the facade. And just to end, can be, for me, the architecture also described as something neutral, strict, geometrical, and classical, that you can see it in this very early project, this pavilion, made on plastic boxes, no? With this kind of very clear geometry, no? And the way they placed the doors. And that's how they end that statement, saying that the office is by this able to create structures that are neutral and economic, as well as being enjoyable and innovative, exposing or giving shade to what's hidden in the vitality of life. For you, Atelier Kempe.
So thank you very much for this invitation. I just have also a small introduction part in the beginning, which I quickly just want to show you. The lecture I have to do in English, so I have to apologize for this. So I have no knowledge of Spanish, neither of Catalan, which is a bit pity, but that's how it is. The lecture is called Ikea Classicism, and I explain shortly why we call at the moment our lectures like this. We have an office in Rotterdam, as it was already explained, in this very beautiful Facade factory, where we are at the moment, in fact, with 25 people from several countries, and we work at the moment in 7 different countries all over Europe. So Europe is really our core area, one could say, and we have a way of working that is non-specialized. So we are against specialization. We think architects should really do everything, should do housing, renovation, should do public buildings, should do
transformations. So it's all very inspiring types of work. And if you do that across Europe, we never had a boring moment. In fact, it was always quite interesting. We do a lot of joint venture projects, especially in foreign countries with other architects. And we are part of this academic network. As it was already said, we both, Oliver, Thill and me, we come from the east of Germany, so the younger ones of you maybe don't know what that actually meant, but the older ones surely know. So Germany was separated, there was the east, there was the west. The east was communist, the west was capitalist, and we were born in the communist part. And of course, that was the most very, very important kind of basis for our youth and childhood where we grew up. So we belong to the lucky generation. The wall fell and Oliver and me, we started to study exactly at this moment in life where you just flower up, where you discover the world. The wall has fallen and it was a very lucky circumstance. Nevertheless, our childhood and youth was kind of dominated by images like this. So there was a kind of promise in the future, which is certain, which is safe, which is good. It was always looking into the future, typical kind of communist propaganda things, which you nowadays still in North Korea maybe. But of course, which influenced us a lot. So you could have been critical towards this, but still it was there, of course. In East Germany, people were sending postcards like this, for instance. Where it's not really clear if it's ironical or if it's a proudness on what is shown on this postcard. What you see are two identical hotels on the Baltic Sea coast, a very, very beautiful sea coast there. And the hotels are built up in prefabricated elements, so it's kind of modernist sort of irony on this postcard, which is maybe meant even seriously. Interestingly enough, in West Germany, there was this lexicon on architecture history from a guy called Wilfried Koch, who is very famous in Germany, and he has drawn all the architectural history with hand drawings, as you see them on this cover of the book. And he drew with all his love axonometries and perspective drawings of the Egyptian pyramids and the Renaissance buildings and whatsoever. And also East Germany found place in his book, but not with a nice perspective drawing or something like that, but only with this drawing, which is kind of interesting for us because it shows a detail of the joint of the load-bearing facades and the floor plates. And he calls this not detail, but he calls it socialist urbanism. Sozialistischer Städtebau means socialist urbanism. So he shows a detail and talks about urbanism. And it's quite interesting because we grew up, in fact, in a self-understanding that urbanism and detail are really belonging together. And if you conceive a whole city, then you should also think until the detail. That's somehow maybe quite important for the way how we work. At the same time, Oliver and me were very much influenced by the historic buildings in East Germany, especially the Ikea Classicism in East Berlin and the Baroque buildings in Dresden, which were making a big impression on us as we were children. And I think still they are kind of a source of inspiration for us, even literally. We, as many Germans, discovered our German identity in a foreign country when we were abroad, because I think Germany is since the Nazi government kind of disturbed in the Germans are disturbed in their mentality. So they cannot be Germans in Germany, it's not possible, then you're immediately a fascist or a Nazi or something like that. So they try, especially the architects, try to be everything else. They try to be Spanish or Japanese or whatever, but they never be really core Germans. And when we were in Holland, we discovered, wow, this classicism in Germany, as Mies also did, this modernist classicism is actually maybe the right thing. That's really deep in our souls, that's in our hearts, and that's as we are, and that we should just do. And it was quite an amazing discovery. Specific neutrality was a slogan we have found for the way how we work in 2004 when we had a small exposition in Berlin at Christine Feyrei's Edes gallery. And it circumscribes, in fact, this phenomenon that architecture nowadays has to be neutral, resellable, and whatsoever, and at the same time super specific, as you have in Spain the Bilbao Guggenheim from Frank Gehry, which is for me the most hyper-specific building ever imaginable. It doesn't matter even at all which happens in the building, it's just the building itself which is exposed. So we find this phenomenon quite amazing and interesting. And what we try with a kind of maybe Protestant drivenness to make something which is trying to unify these seemingly contradictory two elements. In 2012, we made a bigger monography, and there we thought we give it the title Ikea Classicism, which is really, I think, circumscribing also very well what we do. But IKEA didn't allow it, so we asked IKEA, can we use your name? But they didn't allow that because we found IKEA so kind of typical for our time, for this speed of production, speed of selling, throwing away things, all this capitalist kind of dynamics. And at the same time classicism, because we think we are kind of classicist architects, so we always try to do very symmetric, calm, quiet buildings. And these two things we try to kind of unify. I would like to show you in total 4 projects in a more extended way. And they are in 3 categories. And the first category is public buildings, new constructions. We did several public buildings until now, luckily, so we could do this light building, which was made out of these Dutch beer crates, plastic boxes. We did a small stage directly opposite of the Rotterdam Cathedral in the center for festivals and activities. Or we did, for instance, a small youth center in Amsterdam, Osdorp, which was amazing because it was a very, very low budget. So we could just make a kind of inviting ground floor, and on top we could just spray on insulation because that was the cheapest way to insulate the building thermally. And we have built a concert hall in Austria, the Franz Liszt concert hall in a small village in Austria with 18-meter long plastic windows, acrylic windows. That were our first buildings. And what's interesting in the public projects we do is, or in all the projects we do, is that we always try to make very, very compact buildings, and we are very careful about the architectural form. So we do also round buildings or ellipsoid buildings, as you see here, but we do that very rarely because we think mostly it's not the right answer on the subject, and we think that architecture should still be practical also if it's a specific program. And we do always very compact buildings because we think that's the best answer an architect can give to make buildings energy performant, because when they are compact they have less facade, and then it's also for the economy of the project a better basis. I show you a university building now, which we had finished in 2016 for the University of Leuven in Belgium, which is the biggest university in Belgium, and the place where they built this building is in Genk, which is in the east of Flanders, close to the German border. And it's a research and laboratory building for advanced energy technologies. On a completely weird site, the location is a mine hill of abundant coal mine in this region there. You have still the old mine buildings which give a strong identity to the site. For the rest is completely open field and some birch trees which start to grow. And on this location, the Belgium architecture firm Hub made a plan, an urban master plan, and the wish of the city is to fill up this whole mine hill at a certain moment with research buildings to give more energy, more input to the region, which is now, of course, in crisis. So you see here how it looks like. So it's all an area of industrial buildings mixed with housing. It's a little bit like the Ruhr area in Germany. And you see these old mine buildings, and you see on the left already a little bit our building we made. So the old buildings are very strong, characteristic brick buildings from the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So industrial buildings at that time were done with all the love, very nicely detailed, very well proportioned, with inside spaces of really strong character, really big halls like train stations at this time as well. So there was an ethics behind that to create really good circumstances. And this was a big source of inspiration also for our project. The client at the same time was a very specific client, namely a client of nerds. So the researchers, which were the client, they were not at all interested at first glance in architecture. And they were interested, like this guy, in making their inventions, working on technical things, but not in architecture. And for us it was a big challenge. So how could we allow them their mess? How could we allow them to produce their chaos, to make their researches, their experiments, and still have kind of architectural idea behind it? So the dotted line on top or above these devices was, of course, the thing which was interesting for us. We use always our own office as a reference because our own office is a bit comparable. So there's a lot of chaos in the ground floor, let's say, but the space has a height of 4 meters and is very, very nicely designed. So the more chaos we make, still the space stays good and strong. And Renaissance palaces, like for instance the Farnese Palace in Rome, is an interesting reference for this project because we just found out that this was a project only about big spaces. It was not about small offices or small housing units or something like that. It was only about big spaces. They wanted to have office landscapes and big laboratory spaces and big ateliers, workshops and stuff like that. So quite interesting that you could do a building which looking quite normal like this palace, but inside the spaces are all kind of monumental and strong. So we did a lot of research in the competition stage with several models, and in the end the red circled one is the one we took. And the plan in the beginning is kind of rather simple. So you see that's a parking garage in -1. Not so much to say about it, I would say. And then on the first floor, you see how the organization of the building works. So you have like the entrance, which is here, and left and right you have seminar spaces, which have a double height. You have a big office space, and you have workshop space, a test workshop space, and the most important thing in the middle, you have the matrix space, which is the name for a laboratory where the researchers make kind of research on flexible grids, where you can put in energy and take out energy at the same time. So they are one of these 9 institutes in Europe which research on the smart grid technology, in fact. This is then the main space in the middle, which gives the building a kind of core, a spatial core, and which is also visible directly from out the entrance. So you can look through the big window over here into the space, and left and right you have big windows as well to give these people the possibility to survey the researches they make there. Then just quickly, the first floor, you have again office spaces, you have the void spaces of these seminar spaces, and you have the ateliers, which also have double height. And then on the second floor, you have again a lot of office spaces. The directors sit here, and there's another workshop space, and you have a lot of other small things organized all the way around. Which is quite amazing in this plan is that the building has a width of 50 meters by 75 meters. So of course the challenge for us was how can you organize the building in such a compact way, which of course gives the advantage that these researchers have as much contact as possible, so that synergy effects are the best in this building. And the second thing was then how can you make this building as transparent as possible, as light also in the inside of the building as possible, that you don't feel closed off in a hermetically closed kind of building. In section you see how it works. Again, a very, very simple thing. So it's all like simple boxes stacked. Also here we gave it a large dimension or a big dimension, so that the space flight, the floor height is 4 meters. So it's all quite high spaces. It's interesting because we as architects, we're always very critical on the discussion on sustainability. Actually, we never have done this discussion, although we always designed very sustainable buildings, and the main thing we do is that we make very compact buildings, and of course then the energy performance is already very good. Here we were asked by the clients to make a BREEAM outstanding building and a CO2 neutral building and whatsoever, and actually it's quite funny because we didn't need to do much more effort than we normally do, and we could just reach these goals easily. A big issue was the facade, because the facade in Belgium is always an issue in terms of glass percentages. So we try to make in the competition such a building with big windows, which represent 65% of openness. And in the end, they really pushed us and negotiated us down, and we in the end had to accept this kind of glass percentage, which is only 40%, which was a bit of a pity for us. And we really had to convince them, like 3 months with all kinds of studies, that this 60%, 65% would be good, but they didn't believe it in the end. It was a pure emotional kind of decision in the end. So the researchers in the end were not deciding on basis of scientific facts, but on basis of kind of intuitive, emotional things. We made several mock-ups models, and what you see here is one of these big facade study models. And what you can see here is the facade. So we then put these frames around these windows, which are aluminium frames, because the windows had got smaller and we were risking that the proportions of the windows were too weak, so the proportion of the window in relation to the total of the building. So we had to add a new element, and we used these classical sort of framings around windows to make them look bigger than they actually are. It's like women when they just make their eyes looking a bit black and make them look bigger like this. So we tested that with these aluminium extrusion elements. So that's extruded aluminium of a size of 0.5 meter, and then the actual window frames, and in between them also aluminium folded aluminium sheets to fill up the gaps in between. So then the building under construction. So the structure speaks for itself. We have some images of the building construction, some window frames, and then the finished building. And so what you see here is then this very regionalist sort of structure with always again the same window repeated. With here the big entrance, which is a 21 meter sort of bridge construction, and the windows with these frames. Which is interesting in the facade is that the aluminium is anodized in bronze, and the other aluminium is also anodized in bronze, and because of the anodization effect, you get, depending on the sun constellation, always a different appearance. So for instance, this is again with a different light condition, and then this effect is like inversing itself, and then the window frames get very, very lit, and so on. So this exercise is actually what we, by a lot of buildings do. We try to really go down with the architecture to the most simple thing you can do, and then we kind of make something specific out of it by the scale of the elements, by the proportions of the elements, and by the treatment of course, the angle of the building, and so on. Of course, also very interesting, the relation with the existing mine buildings, what you see there. So the color of the anodized aluminium is also to root the building in this context, which is brick buildings, and this bronze color is matching very well with the brick. So you can see then looking to the building from out these ruins. On the roof they have solar panels. They make a lot of research also in testing solar panels. So the main entrance. And if you enter now the building, you see these spatial effects. So you just are kind of welcomed here at this reception desk, and you can directly look through the main research space as a main relationship. So you can look through nearly the entire 75 meters of the building. And if you look in the other direction, there's a void space. So this is the reception desk, and this is the entrance on the right. And this is the main research space in the heart of the building, under construction, all cast concrete in situ. And then when it was finished, it looks like this. So you can see here how it works. So these are the big windows, which makes it possible that the researchers can survey the experiments they do here in the middle. So sometimes there are also dangerous experiments with whatever kind of magnetic kind of things. You have to, from both sides. And you can look through the entire building through these controlling spaces. And here you can look through the reception desk towards the outside. This is the cross view in the other direction. And this is the double high seminar spaces. So it's also about how can you vary such a simple topic of always stacking the same window, and how to make double high spaces, triple high spaces, or simple height spaces, more landscape, smaller rooms, etc., etc. So you can see the context. You see the effect of the framing of the landscape, which was also something which interested us. So the big windows are all like frames, framing these existing things. So it's like a very strange, surrealistic landscape. It's like atomic war or something like that. So it's a big office, what they wanted, the clients themselves, with a depth of 9 meters, so it's quite deep spaces. And again, a lot of transparency, all the meeting spaces are completely glazed. So you have the access corridor, you look through the access corridor, the meeting spaces towards the outside. And other research spaces, so this is a laboratory to test like heating devices, heatings. So the pipes you see in the wall are all chimneys, so you can just connect a heater to test it there, and then it goes out of the building. All the pipes were composed by our project leader in a very careful way, so it was a kind of Pompidou in the inside, which took a lot of effort because firms are not at all used to that. And on the outside you see that as well, so we found it quite interesting to show these things also on the outside. They're just exposed as natural part of the building. An atelier space where bosses get kind of special engines and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different activities taking place in this building. And the parking garage, which was also designed in a careful way, so that everything is lit naturally and so on. On the same location, just next to it, we built another school building. So funny enough, we won another competition, a European tender on the same location. Much bigger project, which is even bigger. So this is like 100 meters wide and 150 meters long, with ateliers left and right. For us at the moment, the biggest project we ever did for a budget of 32 million euros. So the next chapter I would like to talk to you is the issue of renovation and transformation, which is an increasing topic in our office, in fact. And renovation and transformation is an increasingly important issue in Europe in general, I would say. And it's interesting to think a bit about it in the beginning. So this is, for instance, the Dutch pavilion of the Biennale in Venice in 2010, where the Dutch showed in foam models, in blue foam, all the abandoned buildings of the Netherlands. So these are all empty buildings of the Netherlands which are out of use, which have no function anymore. And this is, of course, touching a very, very sensitive issue, namely the issue of the so-called sustainability discussion nowadays. So if you, for instance, look at such an old city as Amsterdam, so this is Amsterdam, not Venice, it's a bit irritating with this gondola. And you just make a thermoscan of all these ancient buildings, then of course the result is that all these old buildings are of no value because they are just too bad. So everything which is red in this image is of course a leakage of energy, and which will lead at a certain moment to discussion, as it is now done in Germany, that all these old buildings in fact have to be insulated or maybe demolished. And that's a quite crucial, shocking thing, because it raises the question, where do we go to with all these kind of buildings? Because if you look at it in a way like in this diagram, you could distinguish between a pre-modern condition, which is this part, and you have the contemporary condition. And if you look to this kind of graph that shows the norms and regulations which developed in pre-modern conditions, maybe in a relatively stable way, or they stayed always the same. And in a contemporary condition, they were rising and getting more and more strong. And for the building, that means that if you look at existing buildings, in the pre-modern conditions, a building also needed to be renovated, of course. So the quality was going down, and then the buildings were renovated, and they were back, in fact, on a new building sort of quality. But if you now look on the contemporary condition, the norms increase, and at a certain moment you can renovate a building, but you will never ever reach again the quality of a building which is newly built in these conditions. So that means if we go on like this with all our buildings in the norms, then at a certain moment the old buildings won't be of any use anymore, and then we can demolish even more buildings, because we cannot fill everything with culture and museums and stuff like that, because that at a certain moment is just not possible. So that is, yeah, I think quite a shocking thing. And it's especially caused by this what's called sustainability, which in fact, is something I would say is more kind of luxury combined with lobbyism of firms which want to sell their products, especially in Germany, the guys who sell their thermal insulation. Some overview about projects we made in this transformation renovation issue. And what's to be seen is that all these buildings look completely different, so there's no kind of morphology or typology which can be seen, and that's because of the fact that you renovate buildings of different ages, of the 18th, 19th, 20th century, contemporary buildings of the of more recent or less recent age, like from the 80s, completely different than from the 60s. Technologies are different, typologies are different. So renovation is like a collage of a lot of different things. And we apply in our office a certain attitude towards the issue of transformation and renovation of buildings. So we say, like, if the building has a weak or a strong character, we have to do less or more in the transformation. That means if, for instance, you look at this building in Antwerp, which is a 19th century kind of concert hall, then this is a very, very strong architecture, so we don't need to do much. So you just do the building, you keep the building as it is, and that's the best you can do. Or if the building is a really bad one, like this city hall, then you have to do a lot to make something out of it. So we just look on the character of the buildings. We did already realize several projects, like for instance this youth hostel in Prora at the Baltic Sea coast in Germany, which is a Nazi building of 6 kilometers long. So we could renovate a 180-meter long part of this. Or for instance a museum in the Netherlands, in Veenhuizen, which is a 19th century building of Dutch Classicism. Or the City Hall of Borsele, which is this building I just mentioned, which was an incredibly ugly building from the 80s, where in Holland there was no taste, no money, and no inspiration. And so these guys still didn't want to knock this building down, and we just made this out of this building. So we completely changed the facade of the entire building and made a new building out of it. I want to show you a bit more deeply this project, which is a parliament building, parliament for the German-speaking community in Belgium, in Eupen, very, very special case, which has been finished in 2013. Budget was 11 millions. And maybe just a few people of you know the history of Belgium and the history of the German-speaking community. There are 70,000 ex-Germans living in Belgium, and this is a result of World War I. They were cut off Germany because the French wanted to cut them off and give them to Belgium because they wanted to have a bit more buffer between them and the Germans, which had started the World War. And since then, these ex-Germans are now part of Wallonie in Belgium. And the capital is Eupen, a city of 18,000 inhabitants. And the parliament we built for them is the parliament of the whole region, let's say, for all these 70,000 people. It's also funny to say that the degree of governance there is very, very high, maybe the highest in Europe. So these 70,000 German speakers, they live in 7 different little cities, and each city has, of course, a local parliament, a local government, and then all together they have their regional government and regional parliament as well. So, in fact, they all work for the government probably. So this is the existing building the parliament wanted to use for the project, which is a sanatorium building from the 1910s, so just right before the World War started, which looked like this, with a kind of zone where you could lie in the fresh air to cure, in fact, to get better with your disease. In the time it looked like this, and when we were invited for the competition, the building looked like this. So it was an abandoned old building of no use, in terrible condition, but in a very, very beautiful location. So it's on a hill, on a mount. Topography and the landscape is very beautiful. So it looked like this, no maintenance, no money, so they really needed to do something with it. Inside it looked like this, with these kind of cassette doors and these simple corridors, kind of normal but well done. And the rooms looked like this, so they had changed the windows, they were not the original ones, not very nice, of course, and all the pipes were just visual and so on. So the main question for us was, first, how can we add to this existing building an extension? Because it was about renovating the existing building, but also to build an assembly hall to this parliament, or for this parliament. And we were discussing, should we put the assembly hall just behind, that the existing building is well preserved and not disturbed by the new one, or next to it, but that would disturb the composition we found. So then we thought we should put it just in front, which is maybe at first glance a bit weird, but then the topography allowed that we could just dig it a bit in, and then the new building would be a socle for this old building. So you see the new extension and the old building in their relation towards each other. And in terms of internal spaces, it works like this. You have the main entrance here, and then you have a foyer area, and then you have a strong connection via a monumental staircase going down, and then you are in the foyer space for the assembly hall, and you through this assembly hall again to the park. So this is the spatial composition of it. So you see the plans, the typical corridor with, in this case, a library, and the president is sitting here, and this is the reception and the foyer, and some sort of catering space. And then if you go down in the -1 in the actual assembly hall, you have the little assembly hall, but still it's a real assembly hall, and some other special spaces. You can see in section how it works. So this is like the section. Because of the topography, we needed not to dig a lot, so we could just dig out a little bit of ground here, and we could just join this building on the existing -1 of the existing building. Some model photo of a huge model we built. And then the construction site, so you see the construction of the assembly hall. And very interesting in renovation, to come back to the renovation issue, is that you work in several periods of the history of architecture. And in this case, this was the early modernism of the 1910s of the 20th century, where they started to experiment with ceiling systems, for instance. And here you see a ceiling system which consists out of prefabricated concrete elements, sometimes even ceramic elements, or brick elements, and they were just cast together with a very thin plate of concrete with one cable, with one tension cable here. So this is all the reinforcement of the concrete, and the total thickness of the concrete plate was 15 centimeters. And of course, this, according to current contemporary norms of structure is not at all working anymore. So we had to negotiate with the structural engineer that he does not wish to demolish all the floor plates, that we can keep still some of them, because otherwise for cost issues it would have become much too expensive. So to defend this structure was one of the issues in the renovation. So you can see here the floor plates which had to be made new, replaced, which are in blue, and the white ones which stayed the same. So each floor plate was negotiated with the structural engineer if they could stay like this or if they have to be demolished. So the whole renovation was like if you have bad teeth and the dentist is drilling holes everywhere, you know, it was like a big mess and a big collage of parts which stayed, parts which had to be demolished and replaced. Also very interesting issue, the sustainability again. Of course, the building had to be ventilated in a mechanical way, so fresh air and used air, so you need both directions in fact. And we in the end had to drill in total, I think, 580 holes in the existing structure, so it was like a Swiss cheese in the meantime of the building site. Also, this is again a very interesting issue on this what's called sustainability, because if you have to put so much effort into a building that it's still usable nowadays is kind of at least doubtful, I would say. Yeah, some first window tests. So we again brought these original windows in terms of their proportion in it. And the corridors as they looked after the renovation, so with wooden floors, and we just put back a bit the color, we made it all white again. The special spaces like this round foyer space, with first time we used round glass, some meeting room with a round table, and some kind of meeting room in the basement, again another type of space. The staircases with terrazzo granito stairs, handrails, everything monolithic, very nicely done, so we protected all this. Also the building was not a classified building. Some facade image as a rendering. And then when it was executed, so you see the windows, how they were made. So these ornaments we could not keep, that was not possible. So you see old ornaments which had to be covered with all these insulation, which was not our choice, but which was unavoidable, because also they wanted to have a very sustainable building. And you see here how you can make a sustainable building with a lot of insulation when you have a kind of entrance like in a Greek temple. So you have columns, and then of course when you insulate here this column, then you can just wrap in the entire column, which we didn't want to do. So this guy had to saw off parts of the wall that we could go around here with the thermal insulation and not wrap in the column as well. We had to use traditional techniques which we had never done before, so a tile roof, for instance, which was completely new for us. And that's what it looked in the end, with, again, this balcony in a new shape, and here you see this kind of Doric or quasi-Doric sort of entrance, and all these shapes with round, how's it called, drainage pipes and stuff like that, which was a big challenge for us and also for the enterprises to do that very well. The existing, or the extension, the assembly hall you see here, and here the idea was that the building should be part actually of the park, so you get this grass here, and in fact the green should go on in the building, so it's like a green circle in front of this existing building. So we made this little collage of all the materials we used in this project, and this is the green facade where we had to look for technology which we find in a German enterprise who produces green facade elements as prefab elements. You can come along with these elements and just click them in the facade. You get a water system in the elements, and you get a maintenance contract directly. So all this is kind of well organized. So you can see how that works here. And of course the idea was that the building should be green all around, so the roof was green, the facade was green, and the idea was that the whole building would be like grown in, and even the corners would be really grown around, all with the same type of plants. And the idea originally was that it is red, and we found out that you can in a difficult way just achieve the red, because the red is only taking place when there's not so much water. So these plants have more water, they are green, and those ones have less water, and then they become red, which was quite a funny discovery. So you see the kind of pattern of the prefabricated system. And you see the big window panes towards the park from out the assembly hall. And some images. So the doors have a height of 4 meters. They were all especially made for the project. You see some images from the construction site, the ceiling of the assembly hall. And the inside, the interior of the assembly hall, we were confronted with the issue of how can we make a hall, a big hall for speech, for speaking. And there you need to have an acoustics which is absorbing and not reflecting too much. And absorbing acoustics you can achieve with a lot of openness in the panels. And that's what we did then. We were thinking of, we don't want to use standard panels you can buy on the market because we didn't like them. So we always had some critical points on it. So we thought we have to develop a panel ourselves for the interior. And the basis of this panel was then, you can see here these little wooden blocks which are used normally for pavement, for wooden pavements. And we said, like, we make out of these wooden pavement panels, we glue them all one to the other with a gap of 3 millimeters between them, on a background which is just with drilled holes, and behind that we make like rock wool which is used for thermal insulation or for acoustic absorption. And by that we can create an own acoustic panel. And in the end we could really realize this acoustic panel, what you see here. So you see all these little wooden blocks on the background glued together, and the entire interior was made out of these acoustic panels. So you see here the tables for the people of the parliament. In the tables you have the entrances of the fresh air, which is ventilated also through these panels. So these panels are not only for the acoustics but also for the ventilation, in fact, for fresh air and for extraction of the used air. So everything is solved in a synthetic way in these acoustic panels. So the firms did really a very good job. So they did all their craftsmanship very well. So you see the corners which are glued very well. So it's all perfectly made from these firms. Or here this angle, for instance, which is very well done. So this is the view then through this hall towards the park, towards the outside. So this is then where the president sits, this is where the ministers sit, and so on. So this is the speaker's podium. This is from the translators' cabins looking through the big space. And you see here the visual connection to the foyer space with these big window sheets. And again from the other side. And again the foyer space where you come down the stair here and you look through directly and have directly this visual relationship. You have a big roof light, and at the ends you have like big vitrines where we exposed historic photographs of the old building before the renovation. And so on. So you see the monumental stair connecting the new and the existing building. And I come to the third and the last topic, where I would like to show you 2 projects, and this is about housing. So the production of housing has for us as an office always been a very important issue. We started, of course, in the Netherlands. That was, in fact, our mother milk as young architects. We learned housing, and then at a certain moment we were interested to do housing also in other countries, also because of the crisis, because in the Netherlands the production stopped entirely. So we went to Belgium, we went to France, to Germany now, and are doing housing projects there as well. About housing, we developed a clear attitude. In fact, we started with housing to develop ideas on architecture in general. And just to explain a bit this attitude, for instance, this image is saying a lot about one aspect in the housing what we like, namely the suburban qualities, to bring them into the urban dense housing. So of course, Western Europe has this suburban experience with all its advantages, disadvantages, and this painting of David Hockney is of course, telling a lot about this. So it's at the same time very understandable, it's a very individual type of housing, you're closer to nature, and at the same time it's also ridiculous because you're there in your loneliness, you're there in your kind of suburb, a dense urban housing with all the urban facilities is anyway much more sustainable and anyway also maybe more nice to want to. So the suburban experience integrating in the urban condition, which is represented by this image, which has become very famous by Rem Koolhaas, Deleuze's New York publication, which shows in fact stacked individual houses in a New York skyscraper. And in fact, this is a very, very clear statement about what housing should be, namely urban, individual, should have the suburban experience, so meaning big outside spaces, views, and so on. Of course, housing can be produced its best when it's like regionalized, when it's economic, as Le Corbusier started already in 1914 with Maison Domino, with a kind of free space, only columns, which is, I think, still the basis for contemporary architecture when you have low budgets, especially in housing. We could realize in the Netherlands several projects, for instance, like these row houses in Amsterdam, where we generated a kind of prototype for the Dutch row house, which for us is the ultimate prototype, so you cannot do better according to us. This is the best you can achieve, so it's with double high space, full glass facades, a narrow X measure, and a deep plan. We did social housing like this one, for instance, the social rental housing in The Hague, with full glass facade towards a park with a 7.20 meter base, structural base, or the student apartments which were shown in the beginning, which I don't show now more detailed. 64 student apartments in Zwolle in the north of the Netherlands. All these projects built for approximately 850 euros per square meter brutto surface, which is a very, very low budget. And this was, of course, possible because we strategically, again, were doing the same things, namely doing as compact as possible. So these buildings all have average 30% less facade, which makes it possible that you could make glass facades, which you can make expensive facades, even in social housing, even with low budgets. And you can see how we vary on this topic. So you see here projects through the history of our office, in fact, that are built in different contexts, cultural contexts, different countries. And I want to show you now two projects, one in Belgium, one in France, which is the result, in fact, of these studies of our project in the Netherlands. The first one is in Antwerp, 29 apartments for sale for a big promoter in Antwerp who is building the biggest city extension in Belgium at the moment with 2,300 apartments, which is for this small country really quite a big project. And the project has been finished last year. Budget was 6 million. Square meter price was 1,400 euros per square meter building costs. This is the project as a first image. And now I would like to go a bit more into details. The city of Antwerp, so you can see here the historic core of the city, and the project, the whole extension takes place here. This is the Richard Rogers Justice Palace, which is at the end of this main axis of the inner city. So you can see the extension of Antwerp with this New South project. This is the Palace of Justice. And so we were happy enough, busy with the first block, in fact, which is here, which we did together with Polo Architects, which is an Antwerp office. And actually, Polo Architects had the whole commission for the entire building. And then the city architect of the city of Antwerp just said, no, that I don't want to. I want that this building is cut into two. I want another architect at least. And I want to have Atelier Kempe Thill on this. So lucky enough, we were asked for that. Or Polo then called us, yeah, would you be interested? We got a list of potential architects to ask, and you were the first one, so would you be interested to collaborate with us on this project? Of course, we were very happy because we generate most of our work by competition, so that was in like the history of our office since 2000 was the third or the fourth commission we got just right away without doing a competition. The urban plan was set up by Secchi Vigano, an Italian office which is also based in Brussels, and they have developed out of the kind of closed block structure, a kind of open block structure which they called striga. Striga is an ancient Roman type of urban element. The idea here is that the street goes through the block, which I found a bit weird, but in fact the idea is to open up the closed block to make it more open and nice to live in this neighborhood. The developer has now, until now, developed quite some of these buildings, and you can see here our first project together with this one from Polo Architects. So this is an entire part of the city which has been, or which will be built there. In plan, it looks like this. You see the project from our colleagues, and then you see our project. And what you see here already is quite interesting. You see here two gray zones going around or going along the entire building. And this is because Secchi Vigano, the urbanist, they said as a specific quality we would like that on all the projects there's winter gardens and big outside spaces applied, directly translated from the ideas of Lacaton Vassal, the French office, which always make these huge balconies and huge winter gardens. The idea was, of course, that you do maybe from time to time a balcony or winter garden, and we said, we take this very literally, and we make all the way along, everywhere on each side, we make winter gardens. And we conceive the whole building in that way that it's possible, because we would like to make always this kind of structural architecture with one clear concept and not with this kind of variations which are just there for the variation, which we find a bit weaker. As I said already, the basis of the plan is compactness. So this is a scheme we had drawn for this project in Zwolle for the student houses, which just says like, you make the plans as deep as possible. You organize the apartments in panoramic way all the way around, a core in the middle, and you then put a glass facade around it, and by that you can make very, very open and nice way of living. In this case, we had to struggle with other circumstances. First of all, we had to struggle with a higher energy performance. So this project had to be in passive house. The passive house is a kind of very restrictive energy performance, and we had to find an answer on that. And we did not want to arrive in such a kind of German type of house where then the windows become like bunker-like closed, which we find really very uninspiring. We think architects nowadays should really defend these modernist ideas of open spaces, which created a lot of quality in life, we think. So we had to translate this into this kind of architecture, and we had to translate also the way how in the Catholic part of Europe, so Belgium is very Catholic as Spain as well, this glass architecture of the north, to translate this into the southern kind of context, which was for us quite an interesting challenge. So then the plans of the project, you see here the ground floor plan with sort of shop spaces and bicycle storages, entrances of the apartments. You see a passage underneath the building, and you see here a sort of pergola, which is the structure which carries just the winter gardens above. And then you see the typical floor plan, how it is organized. You see the core, which is accessing like 4 apartments all around this core. And you see the winter gardens which were added at each apartment. A winter garden over 10 meters of length and 2.50 meters of width. So in fact, in these small apartments, the winter garden is nearly like doubling the size of the winter garden. And then you see the 4th floor with some special apartments in the setbacks. You have terraces here, and the apartments are smaller, and they go through the entire building. So in section, you see how it works. So you have like the ground floor with this shopping area, Then on top you have 4 regular or 3 regular stories, and then you have a 4th story which is with a higher kind of winter garden zone, which at the same time is the handrail for these people on their terrace on the roof. And you see a parking garage minus or 2 levels of parking garage underneath. The materials we used, we had to kind of find a way on the Belgian mentality. So Belgians are different, completely different than Dutch. Also the Flemish speak the same language. So they are much more into stony architecture, much more into brick, concrete, natural stone. In Holland, a facade out of metal is just normal, but in Belgium this is not normal at all. So we kind of tried to make something with black concrete and anodized aluminium in color, so this kind of bronzish color. And we developed this theme of the balconies and the load-bearing structure of the balcony as a theme itself. And you can see here how that works. So you have beams and columns which carry the whole structure of the winter gardens, which is in a conventional way then. So you see small connecting beams. And the whole facade is just covered with these prefabricated concrete elements, partly very, very big elements. And so that's the way how we developed this entire architectural logic. So you see here the horizontal section of the facade of the winter gardens. You see simple glazing, sliding doors. You see the corner column. You see the regular column. Separation between the winter gardens, which are acoustically high performance. So the Belgians really want to have quiet, even outside spaces. And in a section you see how it works. And this is also explaining a bit this concrete topic. So on one hand it was of course an aesthetic choice, but it was also a technical necessity to do something for the separation between one neighbor and the next neighbor in the vertical sense. Because the fire regulations in Belgium are much more conservative than in the Netherlands, and you actually need like a 1 meter distance between the 2 floors. So this is like 60 centimeters plus 40 centimeters, and then the fire department accepts to make a full glass facade. Of course, when you have to make like a 60 centimeter high beam, this is a very clumsy basis to start with, and that's why we then made these winter gardens very long, so 10-meter length, which we'll see later in the facade, again, get kind of elegance in its totality. So you see here the assembling of the facade. You see here these big elements on the head facade, where then later big windows will be added. Some construction things. Then in the production of the prefab concrete, you can see the firm as they produced it. So this is like a huge element of 4 by 4 meters, giving a monumental scale to the project. Again, such an element, highly polished concrete, and these big beams of 10 and some or even 11.5 meters long, which just gives again this fat concrete beam a kind of elegant proportion. All these joints had to be engineered very well, so you see here these connections between the columns. And then as all these elements arrived on the construction site, sometimes very complicated elements, as you see here, to really go around the corner. And then the project was already under construction, and the prefabrication of the concrete had already started. And then the fire department, unless we had negotiated with them the project, I think 7 times, came and said, you need another escape route. And the only way you can add an escape route is on the facade. So they wanted us to screw ladders on the facade, what you can see there. And of course we didn't want to mess up these very beautiful concrete elements with their shitty ladders. So we found a system which can be folded out of the facade, what you can see here. So you can integrate an element into one of these prefab concrete columns, and it's like folded in and you see nothing on the outside. So luckily we had these very fat columns of 60 centimeters wide, and we had space enough to integrate these folding ladders at the very last moment. It was just 2 weeks before they wanted to cast the columns, without having this gap inside and all the reinforcement and all that. So then we would really have to screw on these elements on the facade. So you can see, you can hardly see something that these ladders are in the columns in here. So they're really integrated and disappear. So you can see what is all about it. So these dimensions are in fact kind of developed by the necessity to get fire protection between the neighboring apartments. So the project in its context, the windows are very large-scale windows, are 3 by 3 meter sliding windows. They are even much bigger to give it a generous sort of appearance. The head facade with fixed glazings, big fixed glazing panes of 6 meter, and behind that you have then a kitchen on each floor. So you can see how people use it. So it's very, very well used. In fact, they live in these winter gardens, which was not the intention originally. So they use it in a very long period of the year. There's the ground floor with this passage and columns underneath the winter gardens, the entrance to the parking garage. And the apartments, interesting enough for us that the client used designed kitchens. You can see here very expensive kitchens, which were part of the standard, even within this price, which was quite amazing for us, from the German firm Bulthaupt, which are really expensive kitchens. And yeah, some of the winter gardens with view to the Schelde River. The very small apartments with these huge winter gardens in front, which nearly double the size of these apartments. And the apartments in the head facade with this big fixed glass with the kitchen just behind it and looking right away out of this window. The corner column. Some of these winter gardens, so it's quite varied also how people, of course, use the winter gardens. And as a last project, I would like to show you a housing project we had built in Paris, which has also been finished last year. And it's about one competition for the biggest housing corporation in Paris, Paris Habitat. And it's about 50 social rental apartments, a dentist and mother-child care kind of public kind of institution. Budget was 7.3 million, and the square meter budget is 1,400 euros per square meter. Here you see the project, and again the same topic. How could we, in fact, translate or find a way of reacting from our Dutch point of view, how housing and living should be, and translate it into the Catholic, more Latin context, in fact. So again, here the topic of the winter garden came up very quickly, and that made in the end the project. Project is located at this place in Paris, in the north, at the Porte Montmartre, at the Boulevard Périphérique. So the line here is the Boulevard Périphérique around Paris. In an area where I had a lot of 60s housing, a lot of abundant buildings also from the 60s, industrial buildings, housing also like this building. This is very interesting. This is the same typology as Lacaton Vassal renovated in their Tour Bois le Prêtre project. And interestingly enough, it's the same client, Paris Habitat, the housing corporation, the same owner, and unless the project was finished and a big success, they just decided to demolish this building, which is completely weird, but it just happened like this. And in fact, it was the intention that these people from this tower should move into our buildings when they were finished, and then they could demolish the tower. And the context then with these social housings from the interbellum period, very, very good quality buildings, and some 60s school on our location, and a small park in front of it, which of course is still there. And here you can see, as we worked on the project, so these are some competition models, And we, of course, had to learn how in France it works with housing. And so you can see here some model studies. So this was the intentional model. The client wanted to have 2 buildings which were shaped a little bit like this, which is according to the very complicated Parisian urban rules. And then we made systematic studies on how in France they make housing. We analyzed, I think, like 35 projects to really know how it works. And in the end came up with, I can say with a certain pride, the most efficient French building which is possible in these circumstances with all the rules, which is a cube of in fact 20 by 20 meters, so more compact is not possible in the French context. And this was a lucky circumstance because it allowed also to create a big courtyard between these 2 buildings, and this diagonal facade came up of the fact that the program was not needed to fill it. And also in terms of urban regulations, we could not fill this corner, and it was very good to connect this building with the ground floor of this building and so on. So there was lots of reasons to kind of give it this a bit strange shape, what you can see here. So this is a connection with this library building which is there. So this is the ground floor with several functions. So you see here this kind of mother-child care thing. This is the dentist. Then you have several other stuff in this plan. You see what was the intentions of the competition to generate views through the courtyard, also to this park, which is on the other side of this school building, even for these people here, to make it more transparent. The Parisian rules are very complicated. I don't know about Barcelona. I guess Barcelona is also complicated, but Paris is until now the most complicated we ever have done. So all these kind of setbacks, which still date back from the Haussmann urban rules, distance rules, and so on, are super complicated to manage. So it's very difficult to arrive in a kind of regionalist architecture where you have a certain systematics of the structure, which we achieved in this building, in fact. So this is, in fact, the French prototype, I would say, and this is a variation on this prototype. So the question was, how could you do a good housing project in this French context, as we did in the Netherlands? One of the big issues is, first of all, the houses in France are very, very small compared to the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, we built social housing. The smallest social housing apartment was 90 square meters with 2 sleeping rooms. And in France, you then make at least 3 sleeping rooms or 4 even. Then you need another thing, the kitchen, which has to be really at the window. And we kind of developed out of all these circumstances this housing type, where you see here the living room being connected with the winter garden directly, and you see here the kitchen, which is in the corner of the building. So we thought the French love their cuisine, their kitchen, and they should have, in fact, the best place in the whole apartment for the kitchen. And at the same time, as a spatial idea on architecture, the kitchen is the extension of the living space and opening up the living space in a panoramic way towards the outside. And by that, unless it's a small apartment, it has more generosity in its spatial appearance. So that was then the spatial topic of these apartments. And of course, the winter garden. So we said like, okay, if we can make the buildings so compact, then maybe we should be able to pay a winter garden all the way around these buildings as a kind of extension, a visual and a spatial extension of these apartments, to give them more quality and to give them some extra space because they are so small, which is a bit sad. And we managed within these costs to give them these winter gardens all the way around. And of course, this winter garden is also a thermal buffer. So for the winter situation and for the summer situation, of course, the sun shading elements are in this winter garden, and you can open the winter garden in summer when it's getting too hot, largely. Some model photograph from the competition model. And then the construction started as a great adventure. So I don't know how it is to construct here in Spain, but in France it was quite an amazing discovery for us. So you see here the beginning of the construction site. And then that was funny because we thought in the beginning, did they really already reach the bottom? But they had not reached the bottom, so they were just digging out a part, and then they were starting to dig out step by step, partially, after that, which was amazing in terms of how you organize kind of building site. Because in Holland they would always go down until the bottom, in Germany as well, and in Belgium as well, and then go up, build up from a solid basis. But in France they just then with small machines just start to dig out chamber by chamber of this basement, which was quite amazing. So maybe interesting to see how it is here. Then you see the concrete structure with prefabricated stair elements, and the whole concrete structure was a mess. So you can see here, when we arrived once on the building site, we saw this, which of course is very problematic. So you have all these pipes which are filling up the entire thickness of the floor plate. The floor plate only 20 centimeters thick, so really that's all, 20 centimeters. And in these 20 centimeters there's only air and some reinforcement. So we had to call the structural engineers very often that they come along and just say if that can be just filled with concrete or do they have to change it. So very often they had to change, rearrange all these pipes because they were not stable enough. A lot of things had to be demolished again. So you see here the quality of the concrete work. The whole work was done by Africans. They didn't speak any word of French. There was only a Portuguese who was the manager of the construction site who spoke a bit of French and didn't speak the language of these Africans. So it was an example of really a very, very rough tendency, I think, all over Europe, how capitalism in fact squeezes costs and how you just get out of this, still some money. So all these people, I guess, they were very, very badly paid, and then you see the quality of the concrete as it was there. We had set up the whole project in prefabrication, especially for the facade. So we thought like all this facade can be done in a Ikea way. So you prefabricate everything, they come along and chuck, just build it in a very quick way. The opposite was the case. So France, which was the country of prefabrication in the 60s, very known for that, was not at all like this anymore. So they came on the building site with their circular saws and just built inside all these wooden facade elements. So there was not at all any prefabrication, in fact. So you can see here some of these works. In the end, it was all well done. Of course, we were happy that all the concrete work was covered with something else. So you see then the entrance doors. The entrance doors are always a specific issue, especially in these urban projects, which have the tendency that you get a wild mix of demands, and then we have to develop a kind of strategy how to handle this. And you can see here these entrance doors, they are like kind of camouflaged within these corrugated aluminum sheets. So there you see only a cut here, and then you see this door handle element with the mailbox and the number of the house as an integrated design to get the architecture of the building under control. And then you see next to it the glazings are only fixed glazings, which then have the full height, in that case 4 meter high window panes. The doors are standard doors, in fact, which are just covered with these corrugated aluminium sheets. Yeah, some model photographs. And then the construction site again. So this is the closing of the courtyard. In Paris, they always close these courtyards with these kind of huge fences. In that case, a 4 meter high fence, which was kind of difficult to get stable. And the balconies. So the question was how to produce balconies all the way around such a social housing project, which of course is in terms of costs quite difficult. And then of course the insulation line was an issue. So how could you continue, or how could you just connect these concrete elements on the floor plates? So the insulation line has to go through, and we developed together with the structural engineers the technology to say like 1/3 are kind of consoles which go through, and 2/3 are insulation. So it's like holes, and that was possible according to the thermal insulation rules in France at this moment. You see the single glass system closing the winter gardens, and here's the real facade, let's say, and you see the handrail. And then the concrete was a big adventure because we had thought as we did in the Netherlands, we make just prefabricated concrete elements for the balconies, and it will go its way, because in the Netherlands there was never any issue. And we always said, like, we want to have the concrete visual apparent, and the client always looked at us as if we were kind of crazy guys. And later we understood, because the enterprise then said, we want to cast the concrete balconies in situ. We want to produce them here, the same guys who did before all these concrete work you had seen. So, of course, for us this was an alarming moment, and we had to reject, I think, 7 or 8 of test plates before they really arrived in making a very good, acceptable, apparent concrete. So it was a learning process for us and for the contractor, for the builder. So they really made a school together with us to learn how to cast apparent concrete on this project. So you see here how they produce it, all the reinforcements, and then they cast the concrete, and then they take it out. So you can see here, these are these holes where the insulation will go through, and these are the elements which connect with the other part of the building. In the corners, of course, they had to make stable corners. They had to take out this thing before they casted it together in the corners, that there was no kind of movement in the joints. That's what they do in this image. And then you have these corner elements. So this pointy corner was quite a pain in the ass. So it was very difficult when you in housing go away from the right angle. Then you always have to make with special kind of things. This is like the single glass sliding door system, which you see here, which of course was still very simple compared to the insulation part. And interesting about this system is that in France there was no system like this. So this whole sliding door system, single glass, did not exist. In the competition stage, we already had researched all over Europe where can you find such a system which can be paid, because otherwise, we maybe were not in the price, in the budget. And we found out that there was an Austrian system which would fit, but in the end, none of these systems had the French certification. So France has its own system, as every country in Europe. So all over Europe you have different rules, of course. And then, luckily enough, the firm who made, and in the end, the whole facade just agreed on producing a special system for this project, which has now becoming their standard system, which is quite cool. So they developed with us these profiles on the basis of this Austrian system, and kind of adapted it in a way that they didn't get legal problems, I hope, for them, and then just could use it. Because the project was big enough, there was enough glass percentage for them, or facade percentage, to develop this system. So you can see here how it works. So you have always 7 elements which form one entire element, and you can open these 5 parts. So 5 of 7 parts can be just slide away, and you can just open your balcony. The project is in a very problematic area in Paris, in the north, where there's a lot of foreigners, a lot of Muslim population. There's the big flea market just around the corner, the Clignancourt flea market, with a lot of selling of crap and rubbish and old stuff, even on the streets, even in front of our buildings. So for us, this was quite amazing situation that we have, like the people you see here, often very poor people, and then you put this building in it, which looks not at all like social housing, but it's the cheapest social housing category in France. Yeah, some images. Very nice, of course, in France, also the treatment of the public space and the gardens, as you have it here in Spain as well, which in Holland is always a bit of a problem. So this was very well done by the landscape architect and by the firms. So the project in this context of these social housings before. And then in the interior, very funny things as well. So you see here, for instance, a separation wall between a sleeping room and another sleeping room with a thickness of only 5 centimeters. So we had detailed all the floor plans in 7 centimeters, which is in Holland the minimum. So we can make a plasterboard sort of separation wall with some rock wool inside. And in France, they always said like, yeah, but it's not necessary for France. You can also go for the 5 centimeter. And we thought like, yeah, come on, it's too shabby. And at a certain moment, we really needed even these 2 centimeters to fulfill the rules on French housing. So it's really going into the millimeters to have enough square meters that all these types of houses really are according to the social housing rules. So we had to take away the 2 centimeters and make these 5 centimeter walls, which are so thin that if you drill a hole in it and you want to put electricity devices inside, that they nearly go through the entire wall and create a hole in this wall. Very interesting also that with the 20 centimeter floor plates which separate the neighbors, the people are very happy with the acoustic condition. So I think in Germany we have another project where we make floor plates with a floating screed. The total thickness is 45 centimeters, and there you're really in a hermetically closed thing, and in France they live with 20 centimeters of separation and they're happy with it. So very interesting stories about Europe, in fact, we learned on this project. So that's one of the small sleeping rooms. That's the living room with the extension through the kitchen, which shows a bit this spatial idea. Again, the same constellation, but towards the other side. So you can look through the other building and so on. And this is the special apartment with this not right angle, which is of course a very nice apartment in terms of space. And then how people live in it. So people had some difficulties to live in these apartments. It was a very interesting study to compare several countries, how people behave in their apartments, how they furniture apartments. So in France, it gave me the impression living in an apartment isn't something completely different than in the north. So in the north, you really live in the apartment. In France, you live more on the street, as maybe here in Spain as well. And the apartment is more a storage for your stuff. So you're not passing so much time in your house, apparently. So this was a very nice one, actually. Again, with a cat. And of course, you have this funny informal stuff. And this is about it. So we just published a new book where we compared 4 housing projects, so the 2 ones we had just seen, and then this student housing in the Netherlands, and then another one in Germany. So we compare 4 countries, in fact, with comparable projects of comparable size. We called it Villa Urbaine. The book is in English and French, and it's still available. Yeah, that was about it. Thank you very much.